Hi guys, it's Casual Friday over here. Sorry for the scarf I'm coming to you from being sick all week, but I did want to touch on a really important topic I've been wanting to cover. It's around giving and receiving feedback. So the thing about giving and receiving feedback is it's something that's so vital to healthy work and personal relationships, friendships, anything under the sun. But it's something that most of us struggle immensely with. So I've categorized it into two types of people. There's the people that are really blunt. They're probably over comfortable giving feedback, and so they do so maybe lacking some tact, or can come off a bit abrasive. And then there's those, which I think more people fall under, that are a little more passive when it comes to giving feedback. Maybe they've had a bad experience with giving feedback in the past, where more often than not people get defensive or it hurts the relationship. And so they've learned through that interaction to internalize. Or people that are just non-confrontational, like the idea of any sort of confrontation makes their blood pressure rise and they get really uncomfortable, and so they avoid it at all costs. Neither of those approaches is healthy, so we need to spend time really focusing on finding the happy medium. So the beauty about feedback is that oftentimes it can keep a small situation from developing into a much larger situation if you're proactive about it. A lot of times things that happen between individuals is either something that just needs to be brought to someone's attention because they don't realize how that behavior is affecting the other person, or is something that's purely a miscommunication or misunderstanding. And if both people can kind of clarify what they really meant or intended or where they were coming from, it can alleviate the problem up front. The situation with the way most people give and receive feedback, where they either don't at all or they wait until it's too late, is then there's so much frustration, anger, and resentment built up that oftentimes there's irreversible damage. There's no resolving the relationship at that point. And again, I speak from the context of both work relationships and personal relationships. It's applicable to both. So an example of this is something I went through in the last year, where in the dance team that I help run, me and somebody else came from totally different frames of reference in terms of what my role was. I was looking at it collaboratively. The other person was looking at it, had been there longer, was looking at it hierarchically. And so when I would chime in for, I think it's this and not this, it was offensive to that person to the point of like, hey, you're stepping on my toes. This is my place, not yours. And frustration was building. And I could sense it in our personal relationship because we were friends, but I didn't understand why. And to me, coming at it from my understanding of it being a collaborative situation, I have a lot of years of experience teaching, and so I thought I was being helpful. Also, just coming from the place of like having a kid, having a house, having a husband, building a business, trying to teach, I probably was not bringing my best self into those practices anyway. I think I definitely was shorter on patience, maybe less tactful than I typically am because it's late at night and I'm tired and I'm just burned out. So it took a while for that to get resolved, and it took us having to sit down and talk about this going on for a period of time. And I felt so bad because that was not how I wanted that person to perceive me. That was not how I wanted to come across. That was not my intention. It was simply started as a difference in what our roles were in that context and filtered into other scenarios where that was playing out and causing frustration, resentment, and then impacting our relationship on in a negative way. So if that had been addressed up front, it could have been something that completely reframed the way that we work together and could have alleviated months of issues that I had no idea I was even causing. So that is where I like to talk about proactive feedback, because when it comes to any sort of working relationship, personal relationship, but speaking particularly through the context of work, right? I see this in organizations all the time. People are afraid to give feedback. And it ties back into, like I said, people being able to receive feedback. So I'm going to talk through a couple of those things. I have what I call rules of engagement, okay? First is pick your battles. If it's something that's small and insignificant, let it alone. That's specifically for people that are really blunt and really okay giving feedback. You tend to be the ones that just kind of blurt out every little thing that offends you or crosses your mind. Is like, no, don't do that, don't do that. Pick your battles, okay? It's uncomfortable for everyone involved. So if it's not something that impacts your work, if someone's just having a bad day, a bad moment, a lapse in judgment, let it go, okay? It's not the end of the world. Question, is it a minor offense or is it a personal preference, right? Like if so-and-so sets up their desk this way and you prefer that they set it up this way, is that really going to make or break your ability to work together and get it done? Probably not. So that's a personal preference. It's a minor offense in your eyes, right? So let it go. Now, even if someone made a small error, let's say you're a manager and someone who typically is on point with their work makes a small error. Maybe it's a typo in an email, or they send you a spreadsheet and there's like one or two little mistakes that don't impact the overall quality of the work and it's easy enough for you to just fix. Again, weigh the pros and cons. Like you're going to make that person feel really guilty. That's not typical of their work. It's not very impactful whether they made it or not, and it takes you 2 seconds to fix. Maybe not a time or necessity to bring it up. If that becomes recurring, however, that is a time to bring it up. So that brings me to the next question that you want to ask yourself, which is this behavior something that's happened previously, and if it continues to happen, it'll cause tension, damage to the relationship, or impact the quality of work? Then yes, that is absolutely a time that you should be bringing up and providing the feedback. Does it violate a boundary? If someone says something that's super offensive or, crosses a very important boundary for you, absolutely bring it up. Does it affect your quality of life? If it's creating tension and it's starting to negatively impact the way you view that person or your desire to even relate to them at all, you have to address it right away. Like I said, the longer you let it go, the more it starts to frame the way that we view everything they do and say in a negative way, and the more damage and lasting impact it'll have on your relationship, and harder it is to get that relationship back and reverse those situations. So the next thing that I say for rules of engagement is practice talking through it to yourself or somebody else. Now, the key of talking through it to somebody else, it has to be someone objective. If you're on a team, don't go and talk it through with somebody else on the team. They're subjective. You're pulling them in the middle. It ends up being like you're talking about someone behind their back situation. Don't do that. Talk to a friend outside of work or your partner at home, and just practice talking through it objectively and calmly. Practice talking through it in your head, anticipating what responses they might have, pulling out the facts and examples, right? Facts and examples are very important. It helps people be able to recognize where they went wrong and how to fix it in the future. And it's not solely based on feelings. Now, feelings are important too, because you can do something that doesn't offend 3/4 of the people that you're doing it in front of, but maybe offends 1 or 2 people based on their personal experiences or preferences. You still want to know that. It's not no longer valuable because it does offend some people and not somebody else, right? Like I had gotten the feedback from a couple people on my team, back to that scenario I encountered where they were like, oh, I didn't think you were overstepping at all. It was perfectly fine. Well, I'm not going to then validate myself and say oh, it's not a problem. So-and-so thought it was fine and this other person thought it was fine. So your feelings are no longer valid. No, it's absolutely valid. So feelings matter. And again, that's based on personal experiences and preferences. So you want to weigh that, but you can't just talk about how you feel. You have to talk about, here are the behaviors. Here are some prime examples of where this has happened on a couple occasions and why I want to bring it to your attention. Now, practice avoiding accusatory language. This is the next one. When you're talking through a situation, if you start getting into you did this and you did that and you made me feel this way, it's very accusatory. It's immediately going to get someone on the defense. This is why practicing the conversation ahead of time and avoiding this type of language is really helpful, because even I, all the time, have to catch myself falling into that pattern. It's very easy. Simple things as choosing your words better can make the entire difference in how that conversation goes. Instead, say, when this behavior happened, this is how I felt. This was my response to it, or it made me feel this way. again, focus on the behavior and not on the person. Now, when it comes to the next rule of engagement, focus on a positive outcome, okay? When you're talking to somebody and you're just venting, that's one thing. It is good for you to get it off your chest. It is good for you to get it out in the open and directly to that person instead of going and talking to somebody else about them behind their back or letting it fester and get worse. But there needs to be a resolution. And that ties back into like, how do I choose whether it's worth bringing up? Think of the resolution. If it's impacting your relationship, then make it about that. Hey, I want us to have a really positive relationship moving forward. I care about your friendship, and so I want us to get this resolved and be on the same page. Or if it's a work relationship, hey, this is negatively impacting our ability to work together. And I think that you bring a lot of positive things to the table, I bring a lot of positive things to the table, and we could be really effective if we're better at communicating and working together. So always tie it back to the outcome you want to see and make it a positive thing. Okay? Again, remember, this is super stressful for a lot of people. It's really hard to give and receive feedback. So that last piece, receive feedback, is my last rule of engagement, because this is almost the most important part as how you give the feedback is how you receive feedback. Okay? When you give feedback, you always want to open up to, is there something I could have done better? If you show that you're equally open to receiving feedback as giving it, it levels the playing field. If you're always the one telling you did this and you did that and it made me feel this, but you're not open to receiving it yourself, that's really a one-way relationship, and that's not going to go over well. You gain a lot more trust with someone, and it becomes more of like a fair and equal give and take relationship if you're able to say, is there something I could have done better moving forward? When you ask that question, be open to receiving it. It's not always easy. On that same topic, when I asked my husband, hey, did you see this behavior? He's like, oh, he gave me some things that made me feel better and other things that were hard to hear. And my immediate response was to wall up and pull away, because he was holding my hand when he was talking to me about it, because I felt bad about how I was coming across, and it was not my intention. And because that made me feel so crummy, I wanted to just pull in. That's a very natural reaction, but you have to manage that. I made a conscious effort to keep holding his hand and trying to stay positive, because I asked him to be honest with me. And if I ask someone to be honest and then I shut them down for being honest or have a really negative reaction, they're not going to want to be honest with me anymore. So you can't do the bait and switch. You can't say like, tell me what I can do better, and then someone tells you and you start acting like a jerk, or you start avoiding them in the future, or you get really defensive or explode in the moment. Like that's complete opposite of what you want to do. Is actually going to reverse it and make someone even more hesitant to be honest with you or open with you. And if you want to approach them with feedback in the future, they're not going to want to engage with you. So don't do anything to undermine that trust and undermine that open communication. It's vital to all of your relationships. So just recapping. Okay, I need to look back at my list so I can remember the order. I still have sick brain. Pick your battles. Practice talking it out to yourself and to an objective party. Always ask for feedback and stay away from accusatory language. And then be open and receptive. Don't get defensive. I hope this is helpful. I come across it in my daily life with relationships and in, again, client work all the time. So it is a really important and kind of long topic. Sorry for the lengthy video, but something I wanted to touch on because I think it's something we can all consciously work on and practice readily. Okay, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.